The most powerful people in the US aren't always the richest. The presidency of the United States might be one of the most powerful positions on the planet, but it hasn't always equated to enormous amounts of wealth. Several of the men who occupied the White House endured hard times earlier in life, and though many prospered financially in their pre- and post-presidency years, some never achieved a particularly outsized income. Number 5. Chester Arthur. Term 1881 to 1885. Other occupations: teacher, lawyer, quartermaster general, customs official. The man who succeeded Garfield after his assassination wasn't particularly well-heeled either. Though he trained to be a lawyer, Chester A. Arthur spent most of his adult life in the public sector. After the war, Arthur became a collector of the New York Customs House, where he developed a reputation for abetting the city's notorious patronage system. In 1880, James Garfield tapped Arthur as his vice president, putting him in line for the presidency when Garfield was assassinated, just months into his term. Though Arthur was never a particularly wealthy man, he was known to enjoy the finer things in life. Number 4. Woodrow Wilson. Term 1913 to 1921. Other occupations: lawyer, professor, university president, governor of New Jersey. Though never exactly poor, America's 28th president came from modest means and stayed there, spending much of his career in academia. Wilson would eventually go on to receive a PhD in political science from Johns Hopkins University, making him the only U.S. president with a doctoral degree. Afterward, Wilson taught at Princeton, where he actually earned the highest salary of anyone on its faculty, $6,500 annually, or about $187,000 today, in part to counter a competitive bid from the University of Virginia. He would later serve as the prestigious university's president from 1902 to 1910. Wilson left his academic career to briefly serve as the Democratic governor of New Jersey. Within 2 years, he would ascend to the White House after winning the 1912 election. Wilson's tenure as commander-in-chief was marked by a simultaneous progressive view of military force. He tried to keep America out of World War I, until doing so became politically untenable, and pushed for the League of Nations afterward, and in abetting racial prejudice on the home front. Among the more controversial aspects of his presidency was the segregation of several federal offices. Number 3. James A. Garfield. Term March to September 1881. Other occupations: college president, army officer, U.S. congressman. The 20th president was born into poverty, growing up in a log cabin in Ohio with 4 siblings. National Park Service: James Abram Garfield, 1831 to 1881. Garfield worked various odd jobs including carpenter and janitor to get himself through college. Despite a distinguished, not to mention eclectic resume, Garfield never made large sums of money. While still in his 20s, he became a college president and was later elected the youngest member of the Ohio State Legislature. When the Civil War broke out in 1861, the young Garfield helped assemble the 42nd Ohio Infantry, and he eventually gained the rank of Major General. He went on to serve 8 terms as a U.S. congressman, at a time when that job paid between $5,000 and $7,500 a year, roughly $112,000 to $168,000 in today's dollars. Garfield eventually reached the White House in 1881, although his term was cut short when he succumbed to an assassin's bullet just 6 months into office. Number 2. Calvin Coolidge. Term 1923 to 1929. Other occupations: lawyer, politician, author, columnist. During his 6 years in office, Calvin Coolidge's tax cuts and laissez-faire approach to business were seen by many as exacerbating the gulf between rich and poor in America. But Coolidge himself was never particularly wealthy. The famously stoic politician grew up in tiny Plymouth Notch, Vermont, where his hard-working father ran a general store. Coolidge's mother died when he was just 12. He studied at Amherst College before passing the bar exam in 1898. For nearly 2 decades, Coolidge ran a relatively modest law practice in Northampton, Massachusetts, specializing in wills, bankruptcies, and real estate transactions. Silent Cal, as he would later be known, was appointed the Northampton city solicitor in 1900, the start of a slow, steady political ascent that led to the Massachusetts governorship in 1918. A few years later, Coolidge was picked as Warren Harding's vice president, unexpectedly rising to the Oval Office in 1923 after Harding's unexpected death. The nation enjoyed several years of prosperity under the Vermont natives' pro-business policies. Which also saw a revolution in cultural norms during the Jazz Age. In his post-presidency, Coolidge would continue to make a respectable, if not enormous, income from writing a magazine column and penning his autobiography. Number 1. Harry S. Truman. Term: 1945 to 1953. Other occupations: farmer, soldier, shop owner. The 33rd President of the United States of America spent much of his life in financial turmoil. He had a modest upbringing in rural Missouri, where he spent his early adult years as a farmer. When he returned from military service in World War I, Truman opened a men's clothing store that fell on hard times, leaving the Army veteran close to bankruptcy. Truman spent the remainder of his career in the public sector, first as a county judge, and later as a United States Senator, where he became famous for investigating waste and abuse in defense contracts. He became Franklin D. Roosevelt's vice president in January 1945, taking over leadership after Roosevelt's death just 3 months later. After his presidency, Truman and his wife Bess returned to Independence, Missouri, where popular lore suggests he led a relatively Poper-like existence, but that image may not be entirely true. Indeed, for a short time after leaving Washington, Truman's income was principally from a small pension of $1,350 a year, roughly $13,800, adjusted for inflation, from his stint in the Army, not as Commander-in-Chief. And he famously turned down high-paying corporate jobs, believing that cashing in on his name was below the office of the presidency. But he signed the rights to his memoir for $600,000 in the mid-1950s, more than $6 million adjusted for inflation, that was reportedly paid out over several years. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for content just like it.